Well, why don't we get started? We have an absolutely terrific panel here, and we want to give as much time as we can for all of you in the audience to participate, since we know, in addition to just to students who are interested and people who are interested in these areas. Generally, we also have people who are in the business and who have something to say about these issues. So my goal here is to simply just get the party started by giving 1 second introduction to the panel and very brief introductions to our panelists, and then begin with some questions for them. But be thinking about the issues that you want to discuss with this terrific group of people, and I promise you we'll get as much time for that as possible. So my name is David Wilkins. I'm a professor here. I see some of my former students in the room, which is always a great joy for me. It may not be a great joy for them, but it's a great joy for me. And I've been here a long time, and I actually have almost nothing to do with the entertainment industry, with the exception of the fact that my wife, Anne-Marie Wilkins, who some of you heard at an earlier panel, is actually quite involved in the industry and represents a number of prominent recording artists, including Harry Connick Jr. and Branford Marsalis and Joshua Redmond. So she promised to be, I asked her if she would take my place, and she said no. So, but you might want to ask her questions as well. Look, the subject of our panel today is something that, you know, everybody knows is going on, which is the kind of disruption of the traditional models of the entertainment industry. I suppose we first became aware of this in the music business and with streaming and downloads and all of that, that it completely disrupted that business. That's something Anne-Marie knows all too well. The way I always say it, when I first started going with her to Sony Music in the early 1990s. It was this giant building filled with all these cool 20 and 30-somethings blasting music. And, you know, they were the kingmakers of who got to do what and who got to hear what. And now you go in there, it's like a ghost town, okay? Because the model has just been completely disrupted by consumers being able to get, you know, what they want, when they want, and how they want it, and not having to have the intermediary of the recording companies and all of their tastemakers decide what it was you were going to listen to. And I think the movie business and the television business mostly smirked and said, well, that's what those, you know, little people get. And then suddenly it was happening to them. And, you know, whether it's streaming or all the different ways that content is being delivered now are posing a fundamental challenge to every part of that business. Just a couple of things that our panelists have told me about. So movie revenues were down 15% last year after having this summer, which is the most critical time where you get the big blockbusters, many of which turned out to fail. You know, you've got people cutting the cord of the cable. You have all the big awards going to streaming services, which are on a completely different or very different business model than the traditional one. So it's a time of enormous transition, and we are very lucky to have three incredible people who've been in the business, who have lived through some of these changes, and who are going to have a big effect on how the industry or industries, maybe that'll be one of the things we talk about, is it fair to call it even one industry anymore, respond to these changes. So to my immediate left is my, not my old friend, my dear friend, who I've known for more years than we will admit, Deborah Martin Chase, who is, as we'll say, an independent producer, has been involved in some of the top franchises, both on television and in film, has a wide range of experiences we'll come back to in a second. To her left is Patricia Losella, am I pronouncing correctly, who is at Lionsgate, one of the most important film studios, and again has been involved in blockbusters like The Hunger Games and Twilight and other important films, and she'll tell us a little bit about what the future of that business is. And then finally to her left is Rita Morales, who is an Associate General Counsel and Vice President for Business Affairs at Turner Broadcasting. So again, one of the big players, maybe the biggest player, the one that really created the cable business as much as anybody else, but is now in the midst of thinking, what's the future of cable? So I'm going to start with just a short question to each of them, which will give them a chance to kind of both say a little bit more about themselves, but also to talk about their vantage point in the industry, and we'll have a little discussion among the panelists, and then we'll open it up for questions. So, Deborah, I promised I was going to pick on you first, and it's because really your career has really straddled all of these different kinds of media, and you really are in a unique position to kind of think about what's happening in each of the places and how you, as an independent producer, think about choosing whether you're developing a show for a movie, developing it for television, developing it for a streaming service, network, whatever. So if you could say a little bit about just how you see the world unfolding from your point of view.
Sure. I call myself a film and television producer for familiarity, but I really, for the last few years, have defined myself as a content producer. Because at the end of the day, it is, for me, it's about finding great material, putting together the right package with the writer or maybe a piece of talent, and then finding what is the right platform. And, back in the day, when, as a successful film producer, people were, and I started in TV early on because I learned this lesson early on, but people would say to me, "You're a film producer. Why are you doing television?" I mean, it was really considered a stepchild in the industry. That obviously has changed tremendously, and so the opportunities are huge because there are over 450 scripted shows being broadcast over different platforms now, which is enormous. That's only going to continue. You have major. So a couple things, but that's also meant the disruption of the traditional business. Movies now, you have the major movie studios who are doing the big tentpole, looking at the worldwide box office movies, and then you have the smaller movie business, and you have Lionsgate, which kind of straddles the two between Hunger Games on the one hand and some more, smaller character-driven movies. But so their choices there. You figure out where do I fit in there, and there's a different way to exploit that. And then in television, you've got networks, you've got cable, and you've got streaming cable. And cable's kind of being squeezed. I mean, want to hear your thoughts about it, but I think, Netflix, where 5 years ago we were still getting DVDs in the mail, or 6 years ago, from Netflix, and now, they're like, kill it. They've changed the shape of the business. So it's both an interesting time, opportunities are being created, both for us as professionals and for you as consumers, but I feel like I just keep saying, I know a big change is coming like every 6 months, and part of my job, my success depends on, identifying that change as soon as possible and adjusting my business accordingly.
So, Patricia, that's a great segue to you because you are in the position, and Lionsgate's in the position of they have to decide whether to greenlight a project. It's a substantial investment. You've had these great franchises, but then you look at The Mummy, which had been this incredibly successful franchise, and it was a complete and total flop over the summer. And, how does that affect what you do in terms of the films you decide to go ahead with, but also all the other relationships that you have as a studio, including with the exhibitors? How are you thinking about that?
Well, I started in the film business. I did not really do a lot of television work, but I dabbled in it a bit. And I think you're 100% right that it was a stepchild of feature films when I started. Just the opposite now. You really have to understand the TV end of the business, or you're going to be obsolete at some point. Not because features are obsolete, because I actually am less pessimistic about the future of the movie business. I actually see that the summer was down 15%, but I do have a lot of contacts in the feature, in exhibition and distribution. And what I'm being told is it's a crowded fall, it's going to be a big fall, and for the end of the year, we're not going to be down at all in the box office. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a prediction at this point. But last weekend, the horror film, came out and blew away all records for a horror film, for a film released on that weekend, which was historically one of the worst weekends, and it wasn't a Lionsgate film. But I think for me, that was an indication that it is about content, and if you're giving the content to whether it's produced as a feature or a television or a Netflix show, if people want to see something, they will go to the theaters to see it if it's a feature. And so I think it's people are very pessimistic about the future of the movie business. And I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and CNBC was on somebody's television, and I saw like the movie business is dead or whatever, and stocks, for Regal and AMC started plummeting. And I thought this is so overblown, in my opinion. I see great opportunities. I see the opportunities of not only the technology changing and how to get ahead of it, but using that new technology to advertise and market films in a way that we couldn't advertise and market films before. Now, do I think the traditional movie theater where you sit and the seats look the same and the service is the same and the screen is the same, I see that changing. I think, in a matter of time, at some point the technology will be maybe virtual reality, or there will be something else that when you go to the theater, it will be a slightly different experience. But when we're making movies now, we develop them in my department as a feature. But there is now more and more the possibility that it becomes something else along the way, and then we flip the model. It's very easy. You have the script. It's a slightly different financial model, and then we sit down with the numbers and decide it makes sense to do this here or there for whatever reason. So I actually see it as really, I know that the term disruptor is used a lot, and I see it really as an exciting opportunity. And I know that it happened in the music business. I mean, I think for me, the concern is piracy more than anything else, or if we put something and we stream it day and date with it, that it will somehow be pirated. People will be getting stuff for free. I think that's the disruption. I don't think that, maybe the consumer wants to see something in their home on Netflix versus going to a movie theater. That seems to be an opportunity to me for the consumer. And I kind of think we're aligned with Netflix. I'm not really afraid of that business. Lionsgate actually has a TV division and a movie division, and we also do a lot in virtual reality, theme parks. So we're kind of touching upon every area. It's a little bit more innovative, I
You're
think.
more nimble
Yeah.
Yeah.
than
Yes. Well, I started at Warner Brothers. It was more of,
That's
if
what I'm saying,
it's
yeah.
a tentpole or you're in the other. We kind of cross all. So I'm sitting in meetings with the TV people and the virtual reality people, and it's really we're trying to get our hands in everything so we can easily cross the boundaries.
So Rita, how do you see where the opportunities are? Because you are in a business where a lot of what they're talking about is kind of being squeezed on you from both ends, right?
Well, it is. I mean, I work for Turner, and I think everybody knows about Turner. Turner's one of the Time Warner divisions, along with Warner Brothers and HBO. And we have some major brands. We have CNN and TNT and TBS, and also True TV, TCM, Boomerang, Cartoon Network, and Adult Swim. So the last two networks, Cartoon Network and Adult Swim, those are my networks. I run business and legal affairs for both of those. Anyway. So we have been in the business, on the kids' side anyway, of predicting sort of what the kids' behavior is and looking at sort of the changes in the viewing habits and the like. And so we've been looking at that for a long time. So it's affected the deal making that I do day to day, because we're anticipating things that come up. And we end up making deals for different kind of things where, the key, I think, because people keep talking about the death of the business. The key, I think, is to think about it in this way. There's the distribution side of the cable business, and there's a content side. We're on the content side. And on the content side, even in a hyper-competitive environment, the key is to make sure that you make the most compelling content, that you have a distinctive brand, that you end up finding ways to deliver to a specific audience the thing that they're looking for. For cartoon, that means that we have started developing in a different way. We're really flexible in our development approach. So we're not just making the shorts, which are the equivalent of a pilot in animation. We are now making things that start out as a game. We set up a virtual reality lab to develop things a little differently. So we have been, as you say, you're pretty nimble. So are we, even though we're within a division, within a major media company. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, we are looking at a lot of different things. I mean, look, people ask, how are you responding to this? What are you doing to prepare? Well, I mean, there's this thing called an $84.5 billion merger between AT&T and Time Warner. And the whole purpose of that is to merge distribution and content. I was looking, if you'll permit me, I was going to look at some of the statistics, but I mean, AT&T has 150 million wireless subscribers in the U.S. alone. AT&T has customers in 200 countries. They are developing the 5G high-speed network for streaming. The reason they were interested in Time Warner is that we are a pure content business. And so I don't really worry about the death of my business because I think that we have been doing things, the company has been doing things to prepare for the inevitability of the change. We just have to evolve.
So basically, because you're going to move into streaming, I mean, that's what the AT&T merger is all about, shifting from providing, your content over the cable platform to really being streaming, right?
Well, that is a good part of it because, I mean, one of the things that we've seen, especially with the kids' audience, is they're platform agnostic. I mean, they don't care where they watch content, and I at one time thought that the older audience would not be willing to watch stuff on the small screen, but they do it all the time too now. The binge watching has really changed the way, people consume media as well. It's just you have to know that audience. But yes, I mean, there is a move toward doing more streamings and stacking, which is, allowing people to watch more episodes, at one time, making prior seasons available so they can catch up with the new seasons, doing all those kind of things. But yes, most of the networks and companies are looking at streaming, direct-to-consumer streaming models as sort of the next iteration of distribution, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's what's happening. I mean, that's part of what the AT&T merger is about. But companies like Disney also, has announced a new streaming service that they're doing, and so that's going to be the only place that you can get the Disney, Marvel, and Star Wars content. Once the Netflix deal expires in 2019,
right,
you have to go there. So then, what is Netflix going to do when its licenses start expiring for the content they're getting from other content providers? That is why Netflix is
big money,
is basically driving up trucks of cash and dropping it at people's feet. That's what they're doing.
Well, Patricia, you kind of alluded to this a second ago, but if everything is moving to streaming, you say, well, it's not, the big problem with the record business was people were getting stuff for free. But isn't that actually a big challenge in a streaming model? I mean, i.e. Game of Thrones, Sony. I mean, it's both a security issue and it's also driving down what people will pay the more it's available on a streaming model.
The issue really is, well,
that's streaming as opposed to hacking.
Right.
Yeah. Streaming is Netflix, Amazon, all the networks have their own streaming services, and those are subscriber based. So that's
so they're being paid for. It's not somebody.
Okay.
Yeah.
People are not saying.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is you stream something in another country, and it's on the internet while the movie
it's hacked.
Is in the theaters.
So I guess what I'm saying is the more streaming, the more security problems. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
But it's not a matter of somebody's actually doing something legitimately paying for subscription service. But I think the issue then becomes more of what the model will look like. And I think this is in the very short term, in the next year or two, the relationship between the studios and the exhibitors. Because I have friends who've been in the business 50 years, and when I have this conversation, I hear, when color TV was first invented, everybody said, nobody's going to go to the movies anymore. Then it was DVDs, so there's always some technology that makes people say nobody's going to the movies anymore. So I think the issue really is there are going to be people who want to have that communal experience. There's also the issue of what are you paying for the movie ticket versus how quickly will it be available to you outside of the theaters. And that's such a hot topic right now So I think the issue really is, if a month later, you're going to pay $50 to watch something on TV, will you go to the theaters now? Probably. If you can see it the same day, if it's a day and date release, then maybe it's a different issue, but then maybe the theaters won't play the movie. So there are so many political issues, and I think for people who are in the legal end of the business, it's really not about being a lawyer. It's really about being a business person, because we're in a very relationship-based industry. So we have to make sure that we kind of all figure out what the consumer wants, how to get the consumer what they want, and how to preserve the business for what it is. And I think that there's a lot of, it seems like there's a lot of fear, not with our panelists, but in the industry, there's a lot of fear-based sort of theories. I really just see it as an evolution of the business, and I think that we're all making changes to.
So here's my question. My question is, and I think we'll figure out, we're looking at this summer. So summer prime box office for the year, down 15% from last year. A lot of big flops, a lot of big titles, Transformers, The Mummy, Baywatch, flop, and franchises that were older, Transformers and Pirate, that didn't perform to expectation. But 15% is a big number. At the same time, you had HBO shifted Game of Thrones to summer. Usually airs in the spring. This year it's in the summer. Broke records like every week, from the debut to the finale. HBO spending $30 million per episode on Game of Thrones. They're shooting, 40 to 42 days. I mean, that is a feature film being broadcast every day, every week in your living room for no more money, right? And you sitting back with your big screen TV. So I guess, the question is, was this summer a blip? Or is this summer the beginning of a trend where people are just saying, look, the quality on television has gotten so extraordinary that unless you got to really, it needs to be Star Wars, it needs to be something that is really, Hunger Games in the beginning, because it was
maybe.
fresh and exceptional. You can't just take, it has upped the bar on the quality, the content quality.
I think there
For the
was an
movies.
issue this summer with content, or the advertising of the content, or the timing of releases. So if I'm looking as a movie person, outside of trying to say it's because our business was taken away by Game of Thrones or something, if I just look at the movies that were released this summer, and including some of the franchise films that some of my favorite franchises had movies released, and I went to them and I just felt like the content was maybe not what it had been the last time I saw the movie. I'm trying to be polite about this. And maybe it was released on the wrong weekend, or, for example, with a movie like Baywatch, who are you marketing it to? So I think maybe what it is the bar has been raised. So you actually, because our box office at Lionsgate was up 20% this summer. We're not making any tentpoles. We had a couple films that I was actually surprised did as well as they did, because they were just these little kind of strange, it went for an off audience that wasn't a tentpole film, and the movies overperformed for what I would have hoped. So we were really very excited about that. I think it really is that you have to look at the content and the advertising, and you really have to carefully plan your release date. And I think if you're not giving some alternatives to the consumer, they are going to stay home and watch whatever they're watching on TV. But I do think, and again, this is, it's a crystal ball, but if you look at the fall, and when we get to the end of 2017, I believe that we may be in the same place this year that we were last year. I don't think we're going to be 15% behind. I personally think it was a blip, and it's not that I don't want to face the music. I really don't believe that it's as dire as people have thought based on this summer performance.
So Rita, I wonder where you see this related to other parts of the Turner business. So news, sports, there's been a lot of issue about, NFL coverage, as whether or not people are watching NFL games, and whether they're getting their news off of cable or they're getting news off of the internet. So how does that part of the business fit in?
So, I don't work on the news or the sports side, but it is a significant aspect of, of our business, of Turner's overall business. And on the news side is, I think, really dependent on what's going on in the world. And, CNN has actually been doing really well because of the election coverage, and then unfortunately because of all of these major disasters, right? So, no, I mean, it's sad but true. Sports is actually something that Turner invested heavily in.
Yes.
In order to really address sort of the viewing habits. Sports is one of the very few things that you have to watch live. Mm-hmm. You cannot watch it unless and enjoy it because everybody knows who won and who lost, And so they have invested quite a lot in the sports business, but not just in the live sports broadcasts. Turner has invested in other sports-related things, including, the digital business. Turner runs the PGA.com, the NBA.com, a lot of other websites. The Turner acquired the Bleacher Report for that purpose, and that's, a sports site for millennials, really. And on top, they also acquired a company called E-League, which is people watching people playing games, which I don't get, but, apparently it's a big deal. So that's it's one of the investments that Turner has made in order to continue to stay relevant and keep, keep making profits.
So I'm going to open this up in a second, so you guys should be thinking about questions. There's a lot of interesting stuff on the table, but I'm going to pick up on something Patricia said in passing, because this is Harvard Law School, after all, and everybody here is a lawyer, and my guess is most of the people in this room are lawyers. And so I wonder how you see being a lawyer as fitting in, either in terms of opportunities that this new world is creating, challenges to the kinds of traditional skills that, lawyers bring to the table, challenges to Harvard Law School as to the way in which it prepares students who might be interested in going into this field. So Patricia, why don't you start, and then I'd like everybody to just say something about this, because that is the common thing that, after all, unites everybody who's here at this celebration.
20 years ago, I interviewed at a law firm when I was changing jobs, because I graduated 25 years ago, and I met with a partner who said, new media, you have to get to know that area. And she just kept repeating herself. So it's like, okay. But I really want to do features. So you have to look into the future, and you have to prepare yourself to learn, because it's new territory for all of us. You have to prepare yourself to learn what's next. And there aren't any answers to a lot of these questions. Mm-hmm. I have a team of lawyers, and sometimes something comes in, and we're like, has anybody seen this before? Do we know anybody at other studios who has seen it before? No, nobody's seen it before. We have to now be the pioneers to figure out what's next. So if you have that level of curiosity and you're willing to learn something new and really almost invent something, because the way these are being handled, from guild issues and legal issues and financial issues, is new. I mean, it's evolving. Mm-hmm. So if you are, I would say, if you're practicing law and you want to learn something new, or if you're a law student that wants to get into entertainment, if you learn the next thing, even by self-study, teaching, because you may be the person who comes up with the best way to handle something from a legal standpoint, it affects contracts for all of our talent. Every deal that we do now, we might have a deal where years ago we would just, this is a feature deal, it's not going to television, and now someone says, wait a minute, we're going to make this a TV, we're going to do a series, we're going to do a Netflix series based on this movie franchise. And years ago, it would be like, well, you're not going to get the same actors. They're not going to do it. Now the actors want to work. I mean, you have major talent working on television now. It's no longer seen as a kind of a second-class citizen.
At all.
So I just think you have to be able to then, well, what my group does is we then look at a contract that may have been something drafted 10 years ago, and we have to then change the way we approach it. And so if you can look into what you think's going to be the changes in the industry over the next couple of years and jump into the legal implications, I think that you will have an advantage, especially if you're going for a job. If someone comes in and says, I'm looking for a job and I only do features, I'd be like, that's great, but that's what we're all doing. We need somebody who knows how to do this and how to bridge the gap, how to work on what you said. Sometimes you're not sure if it's going to be a feature or you're going to put it. You have to know how to get it from A to B, because some of our stuff changes continuously. And like last week it was a feature. Now it's going into the TV group. So we're working with each other. There's a lot more of that sort of joint effort. And to understand that's a new area of the law for us, how to figure out how to deal with all that, because it is new.
And Rita, you've got an interesting title because you're both Associate General Counsel, but also Vice President
Well,
for Business and Affairs. So you span.
SVP now, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay, even better, even better. You know, people are getting promoted just by the hour. But no, I mean, by definition, you've got a role that actually straddles a boundary that we didn't used to think about. So how have you thought about it in your career?
Well, yeah, I mean, my role is both a business and a legal role. A lot of companies, they have bifurcated business and legal affairs. And even within Turner, my group of networks is the only one that has a joint business and legal affairs group. So I feel pretty fortunate that I can do both the business and the legal side of it, because frankly, the deal-making side can be really rewarding short-term, but the legal side is the more intellectually challenging side for me. And when I was in law school, it never occurred to me that this is the line of work I'd go into, not at all. You know, I started out as a corporate lawyer. That didn't last long. Then I went into a small a boutique entertainment firm, and that didn't last long. And so before I went in-house. But my first job was in features. So I did features, then went to HBO, and then went into basic cable. But law school, I think what it did do for me and what it helped me with was develop a way of thinking and learning that has served me well in my role. Because it taught me to, you know, when I was here, and, you know, for those of you who are law students, you know, it may seem crazy while you're here, but it really does help you in the real world. But it taught me to think more broadly, to think about the issues, both sides of issues, to think beyond what was directly in front of me. And I have to do that in my work. I have to anticipate. So anytime there's a new kind of deal structure that I have to come up with, I have to anticipate what the other side is going to object to. And I have to anticipate the gives that I will give in response to what I anticipate they will object to. So it requires this whole, you know, way of thinking that takes you beyond the immediate. And that's, you know, sort of what I do on the business side. On the legal side, you know, there was a lot of training that helped me sort of understand contracts. My first two jobs were transactional, so that also helped me, you know, on the legal side. But the intangible is really sort of the interpersonal skills and communication skills that you develop. And you know, I hope that people focus as much on those as they do anything else, because our business is 100% a relationship business. You know, Joel knows this, you know, sitting in the audience, he was at a panel earlier, and we do deals against each other. We have done over the years. And you know, he said it earlier today, you end up doing deals with the same people over and over, and you have to develop, you know, the kind of reputation in the business that people know that you're fair, you're honest, and you're, you know, a straight shooter. Otherwise, you know, you're not going to be able to get your deals done effectively.
So, Deborah, I think you practice law even a shorter amount of time than Rita, as I recall.
I probably have, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's I know, but that makes you in a perfect position because, you know, one of the things, I do these big career studies, and, you know, 20% of our graduates are not practicing law. And some of them have never practiced law. And so one of the questions always is kind of, what's the value of a legal education for the kinds of things that you do? And then you're also in a great position to think about lawyers from the perspective of a business person, right? Who's put together your own company.
Okay, actually, I'm going to tell you both sides of that. So I haven't practiced law in almost 30 years, but I use my legal skills all the time. And it's, combination of what you guys are saying, it's the analytical skills, I mean, it's the basics, it's the things that we learn, how to look at something and go to its essence, how to argue, because basically that's selling. I mean, formulating your position, figuring out how you make it attractive and persuasive to the people that you're presenting it to, and then, putting a little razzle-dazzle on it and going in there and delivering it. It's like, arguing in court, basically. The writing skills, I mean, all the skills, and the basic legal skills. I mean, inevitably there comes a time in some deal where it gets to, I'm rolling up my sleeves and I'm like, we're getting this done today. Like, what's, fill me in, and I get in there and negotiate it because I care and I want to get it done, So I think in today's entertainment business, which is really a combination of business and art, as I was talking about earlier, to have a legal degree or a business degree or some, as a producer, is really invaluable. On the other side, and as a client, the things that I look for that are people who think broadly. I learned this, when I was a young lawyer. You don't want to tell people what they can't do. Mm-hmm. You want to tell them how to get done what they want to get done. I mean, there may be some pieces of, as you're steering them, it's like, we can't do this because of X, Y, and Z, but if we approach it this way, we can get it done. And I just don't have time anymore for the naysayers. You get somebody, and sometimes, I'm not saying this, but sometimes it'll be a lawyer who's in-house, who doesn't really care, and they'll be like, no, you can't do that. And you're like, but why? And well, we just, so being a partner is really, those are the lawyers you want to stay with and keep with you, because they're going to help you build your business and accomplish the vision that you have.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, and a lot of people think that that's the way it is in-house, that we're just there to tell people no. But we have our own set of clients when we're doing production work. We have the creative executives when we're doing development work, and we have the production executives when we're doing production work. And they are our clients. And our job, I always tell the people who work for me that our job is to give them what they want as often as we can. That way, when we say no, they take it seriously. We have to try. The goal is to make content, after all, to get the thing done. And so we take a pretty pragmatic approach. So I mean, you can't in our business get really caught in the clouds in doing your work. You have to actually get into the weeds sometimes.
So listen, there's a lot on the table. The floor is open. I'll keep looking around and try to recognize people. Questions, comments, thoughts? Don't be shy. This is an amazing opportunity. Yes, please. And then over here. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Phaedra Butler.
Oh, hey.
It's such an honor to see three powerful women. No offense to you.
I completely justified.
My question would be, first of all, to Deborah, how important of a role does music play to the success of TV and film?
That's
I'm
great.
a songwriter, producer, and always trying to figure out ways into submitting music and getting involved in that. How much does that play to the success of films and TV?
Huge. Huge, and Phaedra and I have a mutual friend and the thing that I've learned over the last few months is I had assumed that the music business was still down in the dumps, post downloads, and really my eyes have been open to the fact that the music business is once again profitable, and very profitable. And what they have done during the interim is, because they were decimated.
Oh, yeah.
They restructured, they streamlined, they restructured themselves, they accepted the reality that streaming was here to stay, and they cut economically beneficial deals with the streaming companies. so that now they're making money. What I find is that now that they're healthy and stable again, is they're looking for ways to get their music out there, and film and television are once again extremely attractive. So you look at, look at like Guardians of the Galaxy, and of course I'm going to forget the song from but the song in the first one reactivated the entire catalog for what was the song? Who was the group? I forgot. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Was it Journey?
That was a one-hit wonder. That wasn't a big catalog. That was I forgot the name. It wasn't a group that had a big.
Okay, but anyhow, so that it just like it act. But in other cases where and I'm blanking right now, but they're using it both to sell catalogs, to build new artists. I mean, Get Out, the song from Get Out, is like still on the radio heavily. It has been part of the whole Donald Glover, Gambino, childish, juggernaut. So,
Childish
Gambino, sorry.
I have a 16-year-old. That one I knew.
Sorry. But so anyhow, it's a good, it's very important, and I think it's going to become increasingly important for film and television.
Terrific. Thank you. Here, yeah.
Hi, Harrison Lonskin as well. If you were graduating this year from Harvard Law School and you wanted to be doing a version of what you do now,
Great question.
where would you be starting out?
Great question.
You want to start?
Sure. So I always tell people who say they're interested in being in the entertainment business that the best thing that you can do, if you're interested in going in-house anyway, the best thing that you can do is to get the best possible job you can at the best possible firm that you can. Because most media companies won't hire somebody straight out of law school. They will hire junior lawyers after a number of years of law firm training. And the reason I think that we tend to look for people who have law firm training is that there's something about that law firm experience that ends up getting people accustomed to, a corporate environment, the hierarchy, answering to a lot of bosses, working under pressure, and all of that kind of stuff that I think ends up creating, a certain type of lawyer. But I also, though, I have met a lot of people who've taken other routes. I mean, I didn't set out trying to do entertainment work. I just kind of happened upon it, and I just kept saying yes anytime people asked me if I wanted to do something or meet somebody, But I think that it's important to just meet as many people as you can, and you can use the Harvard Law School connection to connect with people in the business, and they will refer you to people. And anybody I know who has ever, asked me to have coffee with them for an informational interview, I try to refer them to somebody else. Anybody who has ever sort of followed every recommendation that somebody made for them ended up getting a job in the entertainment business. Everybody I know.
Wonderful.
Are you geographically Los Angeles, New York, or a city where entertainment is a little more prevalent than, So I think that's the first, geographically it helps.
Yeah,
I
assumed that.
I started in New York. I thought I wanted to be a tax lawyer because I had been a CPA. And without going through my whole story, I then moved to Los Angeles and I practiced corporate law. And I had the question that you're asking now, which is, by the way, one of the questions I'm most frequently asked is how do I get into entertainment law? Because the answer is usually you can't get in unless you have experience. And then it's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? So I always tell people because Lionsgate, again, one of the reasons I do like being there is it's a little unusual. You can do things that you can't typically do in other studios as far as employment. I have a woman who works for me who came in as a lawyer. She worked in corporate as an assistant. So you have to financially be capable of doing that. That's one of the ways she did that, and that's one of the issues. She worked as an assistant. She did not work for me. She worked for the general counsel. And anytime I went past the general counsel's office, she talked to me. Sometimes about her shoes. I mean, it could be anything. And she just had a personality that a year or two later, she said, I'd love to take a stab at, being in your group. So I hired her. She probably got paid a little less than a law firm lawyer would, but she had been doing it for 2 years. And I'm training her along with our group. But you're right, that's the exception to the
It is
rule.
the exception.
I started in corporate, and I actually went to entertainment partners at the firm that I was at, and I said, I will do some of your work on my own time without billing your client. I want to learn. And I read contracts at night and on weekends. They couldn't bill the clients for my time, but that's how I learned. And then I moved to an entertainment firm where I did partially entertainment and partially corporate. And then I moved again to Warner Brothers because someone I had met at the law firm that I started at ended up in Warner Brothers. And so that was the relationship issue. So there's a lot of maneuvering, but I feel like if it's something you really want to do, you will ultimately get there, and there's different paths, toward it. And if you want to, we can exchange information. I can give you some tips.
I always say you have to be really nice to people, and it's true because, every job I ever got, after my first law firm job, I was referred to the job by somebody I knew or had worked with. Everyone.
By the way, if you want to do entertainment or not, that's the way, there is no placement office out there. So, Deborah, just since you do something so different, how, if you have any thoughts on people who want to get in, not so much in the legal roles,
Right.
but, in the production or other kinds of roles in the business?
I think part of it, and I think this is true for any major transition in life, is figuring out what you want to do. Because it's one thing to approach the industry and say, okay, I want to be a lawyer, and you know what that looks like. Before I did practice law for a number of years, not entertainment, and in the year before I hit Hollywood, I spent studying the business, talking to everybody that I knew or who somebody would introduce me to, reading Variety and the Hollywood Reporter, and going to seminars and stuff, and kind of getting an understanding of how the business works. So I was able to say, I want to create content. And so that is either as a producer or as at that time, was focused on film, a studio executive. So then you start to narrow down, and as I talk to people, I could say, this is what I want to do, can you help me? And in my case, for 2 years only, what was then Columbia Pictures had an executive development program where they were looking for people from different disciplines to create a better, more well-rounded studio executive. I made no money. I look at it like my graduate school, but it gave me the keys to the kingdom.
Question? Yeah, please. You don't have to stand up, but if you could just say who you are. I don't, well, it's funny how once one person stands up, I could never make my students stand up in class. Anyway, go ahead. Yes, please stand and recite.
You said prior about how a lot of Netflix's licenses are expiring in 2019, and you said something about how they weren't sure how to address that, how they were just shipping money. Well, I feel like Netflix is already kind of addressing that issue by creating their own shows. Like some examples include like Castlevania show, the definite live action show, Neo Yoko was coming out soon. So I just thought, well, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that'll work do you think that is currently working in that?
No, I actually, that was my point. My point is that Netflix, anticipated this, and that's why they started creating their own content that they owned, so that was.
People are pissed off. The competing, now that they become such a dominant force, Disney and everybody else is mad that they gave them the licenses. So they knew it was coming.
Yeah, they knew it was coming, and that's how they addressed it. And, they've had the money to, what my point was that once the licenses expire and that the film libraries from other content providers are not available to them anymore, they can't rely on things with pre-existing value, with IP that has pre-existing value. So they're going to now have to rely on the content that they create.
So let me ask this, and then just as a way of getting people a chance to think. My son's 16 years old. I hate to say this, but the content provided by all of you, he does not watch. You know what he watches? YouTube.
No.
YouTube.
Yeah.
All he watches is YouTube. Yeah, okay. And so what does that mean? I mean, you know, how does that affect? Because I assume he's your YouTube, that's the consumers of the future. He has his YouTube artist. We went to the Super Bowl and there were all these stars walking around. He had zero interest. And then he saw some YouTuber and he went over and he stood next to him. And I was like, okay. So anyway, what do you think? What's up with that and how does that work?
That is precisely when we talk about disruption.
Yeah.
Because it's throughout, not just, teens, but like kids.
Yeah.
My niece and nephew, they're, 6 years old. They only watch YouTube. So, I've done a lot of work with the Disney Channel over the years. They've had to completely change their business model because they're not the go-to anymore. So the Disney Channel now has stepped into, interestingly, where Disney Features used to do, kind of mid-range family movies, and now obviously they're doing just the tentpole and the huge, title movies. Disney Channel's moved into the $15 million movie range with Descendants and there's a new one. It's like zombies versus something. I don't know. But because they're trying to compete, because they can't. The kids are on YouTube, so that's it. And then look. 5 years ago, Netflix we were returning DVDs, or however 7 years ago. Now they are one of the dominant forces. Amazon, who pocket is really unlimited because at the end of the day, they just want you to sign up for Prime.
Right.
So this is the movie
That's
leader.
it.
The movies and TV are
It's a lost
leader.
leader. It's a lost leader.
They figure once you're on Prime, they say that you're going to buy like 60% of your life on Amazon Prime. How do you compete with that?
Yeah.
So the real answer is it's constantly shifting. You have to just stay on top of what the impact is and what it means for you and your sector of the business.
Yeah. So I think that
Please.
there's another aspect to this, is that they are watching YouTube, and part of it is the short form content, and
Yes.
part of it is, the kind of content that it is. And I think a lot of the networks are responding by creating short form content and delivering it over digital platforms as well. We've done that as well. We, do stuff called Bite Size. We have a CNN app that we do for kids. We've done micro series, 15-second things. We've done a lot of different things to try to address that. But I also think that the AT&T merger is part about that too, because a huge thing that AT&T does really well that we don't do as well is data analytics, consumer profiling,
Right.
that kind of thing. So there's going to be a greater and greater marriage between content providers and companies that can.
Mine the data. So
But that's in response. It's in response to Netflix and Amazon, because that's their whole thing. Is they do the metrics on anything they
Right.
buy.
Right.
House of Cards, which was a spectacular debut, they went through their likes and dislikes and whatever and figured out, okay, David Fincher, Kevin Spacey, they got the basic framework for that they knew they had a secure audience that would love. So we're in that sense, trying to catch up with. You haven't had the tools to do that. Now with AT&T, who's in everybody's home, you're going to get the information to be able to play that game.
Exactly.
So we got started a little late, but maybe just one or two quick questions if other people have anything. Otherwise, yes, please.
How do you guys see your the VR and interactive content potentially affecting your future delivery and development of your content?
You wanna take that?
Uh,
You guys
the
take it.
technology has not developed to the point where they're utilizing it. But I actually have looked at that a fair amount. I actually do believe that in our foreseeable future, the movie experience could be entirely different. You could be in a virtual reality experience, which would be hard to duplicate at home. that may have your son who wasn't interested in going to the movies before, actually interested in because I know my 11-year-old just loves anything with virtual reality. It's like, so I do think that that's the technology. It's a matter of time and development, but I do think that's the direction that we're heading in. And I also think we do a lot with virtual reality with games. And now when I look at contracts, I see maybe that I have to draft something in a way that it's possible that a game becomes a movie where you participate in the movie in some way. I actually believe that's the next thing. And I don't know how long it's going to take for the technology to develop, but.
And we've actually set up a VR lab at the studio where we're developing VR content that's more narrative as opposed to game-based, and that's just a different form of development for us. I mean, we recognize that that's a technology that, it hasn't developed quite to the point where it's so widespread. There's some things, that it makes people sick still, including me. But that is a technology that continues to develop so that people can watch it for longer periods of time. But we are sort of really in full experimental mode with that, where we've done, we're on our second cohort in our VR lab.
So Brian, last question.
You touched on data. In the future, who gets to own the data? Collect it between content creators, content owners, and distributors, i.e. streaming companies and the like.
Well, in our case, the merger is a vertical integration, so it's going to be all one company.
But in terms of studios and actors and
Right.
Script writers,
That is,
and
who
directors,
profits from the collection of the data?
Yeah, I mean that's where a lot of the big money will be made.
Right.
So have those sorts of deals been thought about?
I'm not sure what the question is. You're talking about collecting data so you know how to target certain people for certain.
So, for example, if you acquire a movie, and the content creator says, "Hey, I know this is going to get streamed someday. Can I get some of that data?"
That we would never give. No, that,
We'll see. I mean,
Do you have a comment about that? Because you're a production company,
Right.
and you would like to know who's watching your stuff at some point in the future.
Right, but I mean, again, at this point, where I immediately went to, Netflix, neither Netflix or Amazon will ever tell you
Yeah.
Right.
how you're performing. They're indicia of how you're performing as to where it's listed in the curation and whether it's on the, hot with trending now and all that, but they'll never tell you. It is an interesting question that we are just beginning to grapple with, because heretofore it really has just been Netflix and Amazon, really who have the broad base to get the information. I mean, even the premium cable companies, it's very selective. People are self-selecting. Who subscribes where. So I just think it's one of the up and coming. It'll be a future issue for the industry.
So I will just say, when you combine this with the Internet of Things, that everything will be talking to everything else, and everything will be providing billions and trillions and gazillions of whatever parts of data, and where the money is to be made not just by identifying your own audience, by selling the data to
Right,
third
I
parties,
understand that. Yeah, but
people will
Resulting.
figure out that that's something that people are going to then fight about. Because if I'm making a show that you're collecting a huge amount of data on, and then you're selling that data, and that's where the profit is coming from, to be continued. I tell you what, let's do this, because otherwise I think other people have other, all right, last question, and then, yeah.
Well, I was just going to mention, in terms of these analytics and information people are going to have, I'm an entertainment lawyer, one of our clients, we just closed a deal with Facebook for a half-hour show that's going to have a budget, like an NBC level budget, okay? They're going to know exactly who's watching that, and the young man or young lady who watches that show with no it's going to have some very short advertising, a little bit, 10-second things in it. And guess what? If they like it, guess what they're going to do? They're going to blast it out to their 800 friends. And you might see a worldwide hit show that had to use almost zero ad dollars.
Right, yeah.
Because it went viral the way everything else
All
was,
right.
except this time it's real 10 episodes of an edgy, cool show. Think of like Handmaid's Tale. It's like this, and this is terrible news for you, Rita.
It is
Well-
and it isn't, you know. I mean, it's just evolving. No, I know that Facebook is I know that they set up a studio and they're
Yeah.
now producing programming. I know that so is, you know.
Apple hired the heads of
Apple,
Sony
Facebook.
TV.
Yeah, YouTube is. But at the end of the day, there is increased competition. Absolutely, you know, and that's always been the case. I mean, Netflix just set up they just announced, you know, a family and kids programming launch, you know, and so that's direct competition for cartoon, and you know, so we do understand that, but you know, what I said before is you have to create compelling programming,
Right.
and I think that, you know, at least on the animation side, I don't think there's anybody who produces higher quality programming than we do.
So content is king, and I hope you will agree that content has been king in this amazing panel. Please help and thank our talent.